now it's time to sculpt the tree, so we can go ahead and prepare our mesh. So let's go and select the tree, and I want to increase number of subdivisions here. So let's set the viewport levels to 3. And right now we can create the backup in case you want to go back and sculpt over it. So let's just press Shift D, right click to release, let's press M and move to the Sculpt 001 collection. That's the backup collection of the sculpted objects we created before. And now we can just go ahead and press Ctrl A, hovering over the modifiers panel to apply modifier, or expand the arrow and click apply. So I will hit Ctrl A on this one. And right now we have a pretty dense mesh that's kind of ready for sculpting, but I think we should remesh this anyway to have really consistent size of faces. So let's switch to the sculpting workspace and let's hit slash on a numpad to go into the local view. And right now we can go to the remesh and let's enter 0.01 and click remesh. And I will check the density by enabling the wireframe overlay. So I think this looks all right. And now it's time for yet another new brush. I want to create roots at the bottom of the tree, and there are several brushes that can serve this purpose. And I would mostly point out grab, elastic deform, and snake hook for this purpose. And I want to use snake hook here because that allows for the highest amount of flexibility. So let's select the snake hook right here, and I will increase the size of the brush by pressing F. Okay, something like this, and let's try to extrude some roots. So the snake hook basically grabs your mesh and then pulls the mesh towards the direction you're dragging. So it looks kind of like this. And as you can see, this can really distort your mesh. So let's go something larger here and be really careful. We don't want to go too wild here. So just pick some place and extrude it like this. And you know, it's good to try multiple times. As you can see, if I'm not satisfied with the result, I will hit Ctrl Z and try to extrude it once again. And here you can see the real power of the sculpting, basically, where you have some base object and you can do all crazy stuff and create completely new mesh out of it. So I think this will work fine. And one more thing I want to do after using the snake hook to extrude the roots is to remesh once again. Because if I now enable wireframe overlay once again, you can see how the mesh is really stretched down here and sometimes even distorted. And that's something we really don't want here. So let's hit remesh, and with the same amount, just hit remesh once again, wait for a second, and you will get much better result. Sometimes it can stay distorted, so you can always just take the smooth brush and smooth something out. It's no issue really. But you can see we have now more consistent size of the faces here, and we can continue with our work. So I will disable the wireframe overlay once again. And the next brush I want to show you is one of my favorites, if not favorite, and that's the clay strips right here. I will just reduce the size of the brush with F and show you what it does. Basically allows you to layer the clay in these kind of strips like that. And it's really powerful tool to add more material to your mesh, to add more volume to your object, and layer by layer get to a shape that you really like. And of course it works negative way as well, so you can subtract by holding Control. And this is very useful brush for shaping more complex objects. And here I want to use it for that stylized tree bark. I think it's ideal for that. So right now I will increase the strength because I'm controlling it with the pen pressure anyway. And let's start by adding some strips here and there. I will try this size of the brush. I think that looks quite all right. And let's try to layer something like this. Maybe it was too much, so let's go back to like 0.7. Okay, and here I want to reduce this a little bit, and I want to be able to have a different flow here, something like this. So this way you are able to kind of define the flow of the bark on the tree like this, and create really unique texture. But there are some things you need to be aware of. Sometimes when you have narrow parts like this, you can affect the backside as well, so be careful about that. There's one thing you can do to avoid that, and that's enabling front faces only on the advanced settings here for the clay strips brush. So let's enable that, then it shouldn't be a problem. But it's a good habit to check for errors anyway, so just be aware that sometimes your mesh can get distorted when using large brushes on narrow surfaces or in narrow places. And let's just now go ahead and try to create some interesting flow towards these roots. Something like this. Don't worry about the details, just lay few layers that would kind of define your tree texture going forward, and they'll give you something to work with. And then you can proceed, and don't be afraid to lay multiple layers there. And I really recommend to do this strip here as well, because I think it really helps to define the structure. And then, you know, there can be another one going down like this, so you have this kind of like Y shape. Okay, and here I want to create something a little bit more interesting, a little bit of a knot or something, but the space is too narrow there. So first of all, we can inflate that a little bit, and there's an inflate brush right here. So let's zoom in. I'll increase the size of the brush, and try to inflate this a little bit to get more material in place. Something like this. And then you can always just take the grab brush and try to push things around to make it more even. Okay, and now let's go back to the clay strip. Let's reduce the size a tiny bit, and I want this shape to continue and close as a knot here or something like that. So let's just trace over the whole, and I think the brush is still too large, so let's reduce that a little bit. Okay, that's a good one, I think. So let's just trace over a few more times. And don't forget that front face is only in these narrow places. Okay, maybe let's reduce this here a little bit by holding Control. Then do a few more layers. Okay, let's look from the other side. I think it needs a little bit more structure over here as well. So right now, you know, this is kind of organic process. You can try to repeat the stuff I'm doing here, or like just go ahead, try this clay strips brush and try to create a shape of a tree that you really like, get lost in it. Just keep one thing in mind: you are not creating high fidelity object right now. We are just defining the structure by laying these clay strips. Remember, later we will just do a few more passes over the whole tree, smooth things out, use scrape brush and stuff like that. So go wild, have fun, and keep in mind you just need a rough texture here and nothing more. And one more thing, don't forget, when you distort your mesh too much, it's absolutely okay to just go and remesh it once more, you know, to get a little bit better topology and then continue sculpting. This is starting to look fine, so I think we can just give it some more layers and move on with other brushes. So let's put some more layers on. And we'll really need them because I want to smooth crevices and then use scrape brush to redefine the edges. So we'll need to take off some material of this later. So yeah, just do some more layers. And remember, anytime you need to move the branches a little bit or something, you can use some of these brushes like the drag brush right here with a little bit larger radius, and you can move things around like this. Or you can also use the snake hook with a larger radius, but just be careful about that because that one's really aggressive, and you know, you can move quite a lot with that one, but it can produce some really interesting twisted results like this. So, you know, experiment a little bit with the brushes to get the shapes you really want. And now let's just pick the smooth brush. And as I said before, I want to smooth out cavities here. So let's reduce the size, and I want to just slightly go over. Basically what I'm looking at, I want to get rid of these like jagged surfaces there in the cavities, so it looks a little bit more smooth. Something like this. And don't be afraid of the surface as well. We'll redefine some of these edges with the scrape brush later on. And of course, be careful not to smooth too much over the surface. Like, don't be afraid of it, but use maybe a less strength, because that would a little bit reduce the amount of material you have there at disposal and make things a little bit more complicated for the scrape brush. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I think this is enough with the smooth brush. So one last touch. If you're satisfied with your shapes, with your layers, and with the smoothing, just pick a scrape brush, and you know, we can go ahead and just like before, pick some of these surface layers and scrape over them like this, and that will create that nice sharp edge and great definition. Okay, so I think this is starting to look really nice. I'm quite satisfied with the main texture on the tree, so I will leave it like this. You're of course welcome to go ahead and try to perfect the details a little bit. For me, there's one last step I want to do. After finishing like the main texture, after all of these layers of tree bark and the flow of it, I want to go ahead and scrape a little bit from the branches, because I don't like how they're basically just rounded all over the place. So I want to go and do a little scrapes like this, you know, to introduce some sharper geometry there. Nothing too crazy. And you can see the difference right after you zoom out a little bit, that even the slightest touch can produce nice results. So, you know, don't overdo that one as well. Okay, I really like this. Don't forget to save. And now we can exit local view by pressing slash on a numpad. And let's go to the layout view. Don't forget to right click and shade smooth after the sculpting. And now we can reposition this a little bit better, since we created these roots at the bottom. So we can press G, then Z, and bring it up a little bit. And then later, you know, we can accommodate the surroundings to better match the shape of the tree. So yeah, that's the tree sculpting for you. This was a little bit more of a free flow process, but you could see how I use these default blender brushes. And my favorites are definitely the clay strips scrape tool, the snake hook, and smooth tool. I think there's a lot of things you can do with just those few brushes, along with some creasing and sharp drawing. So yeah, that was one a little bit more advanced sculpting example where we used multiple brushes on the same object. So I hope you enjoyed the process and you like your results. So let's move on and give some final touches to the tower as well.